phenomenal. Just a multitude of flavours, but everything was very harmonious.
Really? Because what?
Yeah.
Could the bab with the beetroot hummus and the chorizo,
Yeah.
is that harmonious though?
Yeah.
Do we have different ideas of harmony, my friend?
We may do, but I should surprise myself.
But it sounds like messy eating, though.
It was.
Yeah.
That is fabulous. Willie, thank you very much for joining us. I'm always nice to hear a creature of habit who's prepared to try something by sticking his kebabs in a sandwich. That's brilliant. We've had people talking about a Christmas sandwich from the UK, turkey ham, stuffing and cranberry sauce.
Ooh, yum.
And honey, onion and marmite is another one. Ooh. So many things to go. Up next is Checkpoint with Lisa Owen, Alan Blackman and Heather Roy. Thank you so much for your time today. Kia ora, New Zealand.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Heidi Akine, a skipper, is seriously injured after a jet boat and a ferry collide in the Bay of Islands. We talked to a passenger who was on board with her young grandchildren. A scrub-up, rebrand and refloat. The government's controversial Three Waters policy gets a new name and a tweak, but are councils buying it? The local government minister is live and sticking with the theme. Three mayors join us too. The broken Coromandel Road that's driving business in a different direction, itching for some relief from scabies, and freeze mobile phone users. The FBI and CERT New Zealand warn that public charging stations are potential danger in disguise. We've got the details. You can watch us live on the RNZ website.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Ahi Marie, good afternoon. I'm Evie Ashton. The National Party leader says the government has done little more than rebrand its Three Waters reform. Plans to establish 4 mega water entities have been abandoned in favour of 10 smaller ones. There's also been a name change from Three Waters to Affordable Waters. Christopher Luxon, whose party has pledged to repeal the reform if elected in October, says today's announcement won't fix anything.
As my mum and dad would say, it's like changing the label on a larder. You still got a larder. Essentially, all that we've done is rebrand. All this government has done is rebrand Three Waters with a different name.
Mana whenua and local council representatives will continue to be equally represented in the groups, advising the 10 new entities, which will be owned by councils and run by a board. The boards will receive strategic oversight from groups made up of local council and mana whenua representatives. The Prime Minister, Chris Hipkins, says this isn't co-governance.
There will be an opportunity for people to have a say within local communities, including mana whenua, in how their water is delivered and their priorities for water. The advisory groups are only one form of that.
The government says the 10 new entities will start operating by July 2026 at the latest. A critically injured person was airlifted to Auckland's Middlemore Hospital early this afternoon after a boat crash in the Bay of Islands. Witnesses say a jet boat crashed into the side of the Paihia Russell ferry, causing major damage to the port side of the ferry. Rosie Morrow, who was on a ferry going in the other direction, says it picked up people from the damaged vessel, which had about a dozen on board when the collision happened.
I know a number of them went off with the injured person, so I only saw the ones that actually came onto our ferry. There was quite a few small children who were very traumatised and crying, which I felt so sorry for them. But I think it wasn't super full, which was very lucky.
You can hear that full interview with Rosie Morrow on Checkpoint shortly. The number of cases of scabies is rising among student populations, but access to treatment is proving difficult, with healing creams in short supply around the country. The Otago University Student Association's Welfare and Equity representative, Kaya Kahurangi Jameson, says cases spiked last August, but now seem to be on the rise again.
Anecdotally, there seems to be quite a prominence of scabies in the student community, and that's coupled with a lack of availability of scabies cream, and I've also heard it's quite difficult to get ivermectin at the moment, so it's really just in full force down here.
The anti-parasitic drug vermectin can be used to treat scabies, but requires a prescription. Pharmac says stock of permethrin lotion is critically low, and more is due in the country within the next 1 to 2 weeks. The Washington Post is reporting the leaker behind hundreds of classified US documents, many relating to the war in Ukraine, claims to have worked on a military base. Post reporter Shane Harris says the files first appeared on a chat room on Discord, an online platform popular with gamers.
And what they understood was that he worked on a military base and that he had access to highly classified information. He started sharing this information as a way, they said, of kind of trying to both somehow educate these followers in his group, these people in his kind of online family, about the world, about world events, and really, it seems, to try and impress them, to come across them as somebody who was deeply informed, but also had information to secrets and information that ordinary people did not.
And the Harry Potter books are to be made into a TV series starring a brand new cast. 7 seasons, each based on one of the 7 books, will be produced by the streaming service Max, formerly known as HBO Max, with J.K. Rowling as executive producer. To sport now, and New Zealand rugby is adamant it's got the right people on the coaching staff of the world champion Black Ferns, despite no women making the lineup. Tony Christie, Steve Jackson and Mike Delaney have been named today to join head coach Alan Bunting, with former Black Ferns assistant coach Whitney Hansen having taken up a role with Aupiki side Matatu. NZR's Hannah Porter says greater depth among female coaches needs to be developed.
Still, women's rugby in this country is relatively young in terms of the professional opportunities that have been available to particularly our coaches, but also our staff working in the women's game. And we know that over the next couple of years we need to be much better in that space to make sure that we are having both male and females come through that pathway.
Tennis great Boris Becker says he's building a third chapter of his life after being released from prison. The 55-year-old German served 8 months of a 2.5-year sentence for hiding $5 million worth of assets and loans to avoid paying debts in the UK. He says his time in prison made him appreciate just how much of a privileged life he had previously led.
Prison is very dangerous. You fight every day for survival. Quickly, you have to surround yourself also with the tough boys, as I would call it, because you need protection. If you think you're better than everybody else, then you lose.
And Champions League holders Real Madrid have beaten Chelsea 2-0 in their first leg quarter-final tie. That's the news.
Blame is shared over Auckland's deadly flooding.
Elected members, they have to take responsibility, but it is the duty of the CEO to carry out these expectations.
Wellington Council is embarrassed by its own streetlight debacle.
I can hear it in your voice. This sounds pretty embarrassing, isn't it?
Oh, look, it's not ideal.
But it's all good news in Huntly and it's drone-delivered pizzas.
Well, it's exciting to be always the first in the country to try things out.
Delivering news straight to your home. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. You're with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. From Northland to Waikato, including Coromandel. Scattered showers, possibly heavy with the risk of thunderstorms and hail north of Hamilton from the afternoon. Easing overnight in Northland and clearing throughout tomorrow afternoon. Waitomo to Whanganui, including Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Mainly fine, scattered afternoon and evening showers, possibly heavy today. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. Showers becoming widespread this afternoon with thunderstorms possible about the ranges, easing to drizzle this evening. Manawatu to Wellington, fine spells increasing, a few showers for Wellington around midday tomorrow. Marlborough, Canterbury, North Otago and Dunedin, periods of rain or drizzle. Nelson, Bulla, Westland, Fiordland, also Central Otago, Southland and Clutha. Isolated showers but rain with heavy falls for Bulla and Northern Westland until evening, becoming fine everywhere early tomorrow. And for Te Kohu, Chatham Islands, showers easing, then clearing tomorrow morning. The time is 7 minutes past 5. Our next traffic news and headlines is at 20 past 5.
Nā mihi Evie, tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai haere mai ki Checkpoint e tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. A rinse and repeat or a reinvention? The government's new version of Three Waters coming up. But first, we begin tonight with a developing story following a boat collision in Northland. A Bay of Islands ferry passenger has described the sheer horror of a boat collision this afternoon, which saw people thrown into the water and the skipper airlifted to Auckland's Middlemore Hospital in a critical medical condition. Robin is holidaying with her husband and 2 grandsons. She was on the Happy Ferry Company's sailing from Russell to Paihia just before midday when she told me she watched the disaster unfold from her seat at the back of the boat.
We saw this massive launch coming full throttle towards us from a fair distance away. But, you know, sometimes when you see a boat coming towards you, it's not as close as you think. So I wondered if I was misjudging the closeness of it. Could not see anyone at the helm of that boat, but that doesn't mean that there wasn't someone there. They had 2, I think, 300 horsepower motors on the back, and it was full fast. And he just didn't swerve, he didn't slow down, he didn't put the throttle down, he just ran straight into the front of the ferry.
Where were you when it hit?
So we were in the back, right at the back. The hit point was where the skipper was, right under the skipper and the motor and everything like that. So immediately we tried, there were people thrown in water. The people who were sitting up the front, I believe there was about 8 of them, we were just yelling at them to get back. So most of them managed to get back into the main part of the boat. And I know there's definitely one person thrown in the water, or he may have jumped in. But someone else said there were 2. I'm not sure on that.
So, Robin, just to be clear, so I can picture this in my head, the ferry and the launch were nose to nose when the collision happened?
No, he came in from the side.
Okay.
Where I was sitting at the back, on the left-hand side.
And what did that feel like at the point of impact?
Massive, just a massive noise and a massive crash. And we didn't lose our balance. And we knew it was coming, so we were all holding on. Well, at least all of us. I was with my 2 grandsons, their very first ferry ride. I was 3 and 7, and my husband. And the hit came, and then we immediately got up and started moving around trying to look for life jackets, but we couldn't find any. So we found some of those little round life raft thingies that you have. There were several of those. People went up to look for the skipper. He was not in a good way at all, badly injured, and I think he was unconscious at that time. So my husband went up and tried to turn the motor off, but he couldn't because the whole of the cab was gone. So he turned the throttle down as far as he could, because we were only going 5 knots anyway. It was a very slow boat. And then he got the fire extinguisher and he removed all the wood away from what hopefully would stop any fire coming on, and 911.
Did the skipper shout out before the collision, or did anyone try to warn this approaching boat to kind of, change direction?
Not that I saw. I think we were all just sitting there thinking, well, he's got to change. We were just thinking, well, when's he going to move, that boat? He's got to move.
And Robin, I know these things happen so quickly. In your mind, can you give us any idea of the time it took from when you spotted this launch to the point of collision?
I'd say it could have been a minute. When the little kids beside us were joking, saying, look, that boat's going so fast, it's going to hit us. And everyone was looking at it for quite a while.
And so how did the people who were thrown into the water or who jumped, what happened to them?
So the guy that hit us, I don't know if he turned his boat around and was going away. I don't know if he was doing something like that on purpose or not. But we were just yelling at him to please go and get the people in the water. And he didn't seem like he was going to do that without us asking him to do it.
Did he say anything, Robin?
No.
Were there others on board his boat?
From what I could see, there was about a 10-year-old boy. But when we saw him in the boat, there were 3 in the boat. So I know he picked one of the people up off the ferry. But I don't know if the second person was also in the water or if he was already on that boat.
You said the skipper was seriously injured. What about injuries to anyone else?
No, I don't think anyone else had any injuries.
I imagine it was pretty frightening though, Robin.
Yeah, very frightening, very traumatic. Kids, we were all screaming, kids screaming everywhere. And then we had to wait quite a while for another ferry to come and pick us up. I rang Coast Guard. I never saw Coast Guard. And there was another boat there that does that parasailing. They came and got the skipper off to try and get him to the ambulance quicker.
Was your ferry taking on water?
No, not that we could see.
And so you mentioned the life jackets. Could you not find life jackets anywhere?
No.
Nothing marked that indicated there were life jackets?
Not that we could see, but that doesn't mean to say that they weren't there. We may have missed it, but they weren't in an obvious place anyway.
In terms of the damage to the ferry that you were on, can you just describe that to me in a bit more detail?
So there was wood everywhere throughout the boat and nails. Like when we got off the boat, we had to watch where we stood because the nails were everywhere poking up. But the whole of the front where the skipper sat was just gone, just smashed up completely. But had that boat hit in the middle of our boat, there would have been a much worse story.
And that is Happy Ferry passenger Robin. Maritime New Zealand is investigating the incident, and after 6 tonight we'll hear from a passenger who was on board the first rescue vessel on the scene. It is almost 5:15. Kia mau tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. A scrub-up, rebrand and refloat, the government's unveiled take 2 of its controversial Three Waters policy that will determine how the country's freshwater, stormwater and wastewater infrastructure will be controlled. It's got a new name now, and the new model will create 10 entities to deliver water services instead of 4, but some mayors remain unconvinced. Political reporter Giles Dexter and cameraman Angus Drever have more.
Three Waters is down the drain. Instead, it's the oh-so-memorable affordable water reform. The government hopes the significantly less catchy name leads to significantly less controversy.
We believe that this strikes the right balance between ensuring cost savings in the delivery of water infrastructure, while also ensuring that those water entities are strongly grounded in their local communities.
The government's refocusing its messaging on water reform squarely on how much ratepayers will save.
Rates has always been a factor and cost savings has always been a factor, but I'm not sure that message got through. I think it's definitely getting through now.
Modelling suggests ratepayers could save between $2,770 and $5,400 by 2054 compared to the cost of doing nothing. But setting up 10 entities instead of 4 will take 2 years longer and will cost more. The government believes the trade-off is a stronger council voice on the new water bodies. South Wairarapa Mayor Martin Connolly, who was at the announcement, feels it'll give a council like his more say compared to the previous model.
We need it to be affordable and we need it to be delivered in a way where we feel we're having the influence on decision making that we need.
But a number of mayors remain unconvinced. Communities for Local Democracy is a group of 31 councils opposed to the reforms. Its co-chair, Manawatu Mayor Helen Warboys, says it's the same plan under a different name.
It is a win that we've got to the 10-entity model, but it's the same model that we had before. There hasn't been any changes to the concerns that have been raised and discussed with the government for the past 18 months.
Grey District Mayor Tanya Gibson says today's announcement is just minor tweaks around the edges.
Our biggest concerns have always been the community property rights and the meaningful local voice, and our ratepayers have paid for these assets over generations. So we still feel that nothing has been done to alleviate the confiscation without compensation for those people.
While Ashburton Mayor Neil Brown says it's still too soon to say if it's won him over.
See whether it's moved enough for us to support the reform, or there still needs to be more engagement with the communities.
But Local Government Minister Kieran McAnulty is adamant that this time the government is listening.
If my suspicion is right, and we've now brought on the support of a number of councils that weren't there previously, I wouldn't have achieved that if it was just a cosmetic change.
One major thing hasn't changed. The 50-50 split between councils and mana whenua on the local representation boards remains. The Prime Minister insists this isn't co-governance and it never was co-governance. But he admits there was a failure over how the water reforms were communicated, which allowed co-governance to dominate the discussions.
this was an area where we could have communicated much better around what we were doing. When we actually made that shift away from talking about co-governance to talking about the representative group model, we probably didn't explain that fully enough so that people understood what we were doing there.
National says the only things that have changed are the name and the number of entities.
The right answer is to return these assets to local control and ownership, make sure you have clear standards around water quality and water investment and infrastructure, and make sure you have councils that can access long-term debt funding for actual long-term, long-lived assets. That's the answer.
The government insists it's committed to this as the final model for water reform, but it's clear it still has some work to do to get more widespread support.
And we'll speak to 3 other mayors after 6 o'clock tonight about the changes. Let us know what you think. You can text us on 2101 or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is 19 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. And Homai o Whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme this evening. Let us know your thoughts on that Three Waters relaunch, although it's not called Three Waters anymore. It's called Affordable Water Reforms. Still a mouthful. 2101 on text, or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. In other news to hand, the Auckland Mayor Wayne Brown has set a deadline for the Auckland Council to implement the recommendations of the independent review into the Auckland anniversary floods. The Mayor says he intends that to happen no later than Friday, October the 13th, where they will have a real-time drill to test the Council's preparedness for a large-scale civil defence emergency. So that response from Auckland Mayor Wayne Brown to that report that was released yesterday, highly critical of the Council's response to the floods. Let us know your thoughts on that one too. Again, 2101 on text, or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Email address checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is time for us to head to the headlines, and Evie is standing by. Anea Evie, mina pita pita kōrero.
Kia ora, Lisa. National Party leader Christopher Luxon says the government's revised plans for managing drinking, waste and stormwater won't fix anything. Instead of 4 entities to oversee Three Waters, there will be 10, but their introduction has been delayed by 2 years to 2026. An eyewitness to this afternoon's Bay of Islands ferry collision told Checkpoint it was lucky there weren't more people on the sailing from Russell to Paihia. The ferry's skipper was airlifted to Auckland's Middlemore Hospital with critical injuries. The Mayor of Auckland, Wayne Brown, says he'll hold an unscheduled drill to test the council's emergency preparedness within the next 6 months. It follows a highly critical review of council's handling of the January 27 floods. The review, which was released yesterday, found the Auckland Civil Defence Emergency Group Plan was outdated and unfit for purpose. Australia's northwestern coast is bracing for the arrival of tropical cyclone Ilsa, which could make landfall tonight along the coast from Port Hedland to just south of Broome. The storm's now Category 4, one rung below the strongest category, and could bring winds of up to 275 kilometres an hour. And a rise in cases of scabies among students has coincided with the shortage of treatment creams. At Otago University, the Students' Association says cases spiked last August and seem to be on the rise again. Pharmac says stocks of permethrin lotion are critically low, but more should be air freighted in within the next fortnight. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic in the South Highland, State Highway 8 and surface flooding between Fairlie and Twizel is making driving difficult. Please take extra care travelling through that area. Our next traffic news and headlines is at 5:40.
I have to say, Evie, the mere mention of scabies in the news makes me want to scratch my arms. I'm sorry, but it does. The coaching lineup for the world champion Black Ferns has been finalised and there's not a woman in sight. In February, Sevens maestro Alan Bunting was named the new head coach of the side after Wayne Smith stood down following the side's World Cup win last year. Bunting has now named a trio of assistants, Tony Christie, Steve Jackson and Mike Delaney, completing an all-male lineup. To discuss the appointments, we're joined by sports editor Stephen Hewson. Stephen, what's going on? No women in the coaching team?
Yeah, on the face of it, not a good look, is it? Well, it's seemingly so, but especially when you consider this, or just last week, New Zealand Rugby launched their 10-year plan for developing the game for women from club level through to that professional top tier. The obvious person you might have thought might come through all of this to be on that coaching panel was Whitney Hansen. She was one of Wayne Smith's assistants with the Black Ferns last year, taking them to the World Cup, but she was recently appointed head of rugby for the Super Rugby Opiki franchise, Matato, and so seemingly being part of the coaching staff of the Black Ferns wasn't on the radar for her. She's sort of further looking to develop her coaching career. And of the trio of assistant coaches announced today, only Tony Christie's got sort of any experience in coaching in the women's game. He's been an assistant in Super Rugby Opiki with Matato and for Canterbury in the Farah Palmer Cup.
So when is this new coaching setup going to have its first outing?
Black Ferns' first test of the season, that's against Australia in Brisbane on June the 29th, as they head to Canada in July for the Pacific 4 series to play the United States and Canada. And then long term, you've got the 2025 Rugby World Cup. That's in England, sort of 2.5 years away. I mean, New Zealand Rugby sort of talked about how it needs to develop women's coaches, and that you've only had Super Rugby Opiki, the professional aspect of the game, going for a couple of years. So not only are you trying to develop the players, you're trying to develop the coaches as well. So long term, I think you'll find the likes of Crystal Koa, who's with the Chiefs Manawa, Victoria Grant, the Hurricanes Pua, you'll see them on the scene as well. And of course, come maybe 2.5 years in the next cycle, Whitney Hansen may well be back again coaching the Black Ferns, but in the top job perhaps.
Thank you, Stephen. That's our sports editor, Stephen Hewson, joining us live there from Wellington. Returning to our earlier story, the relaunched version of the government's Three Waters plan. The policy, rebranded Affordable Water Reforms, abandons plans to establish 4 mega water entities in favour of 10. Like the original plan, the 10 entities will be owned by local councils and run by boards. Joining us now is the Local Government Minister, Kieran McAnulty. Kia ora, Minister. What makes this a winner where the earlier policy wasn't?
Kia ora. Well, the changes that we announced today came as a direct result of the feedback from the local government sector. I did a tour last year of each of the 55 rural and provincial councils that I've been engaging ever since. Every one of them says that they can't do it by themselves, but they were uncomfortable with their perception that they had a lack of local voice under 4 entities. So by going to 10 entities, we can now guarantee that every mayor, or indeed every council, has a seat at the table.
Okay, so what does that exactly mean, a seat at the table? There's going to be these regional representatives groups.
Yeah.
Who is going to be on them and who appoints those people?
Well, this is the crux of the issue, is that we need to get the debt associated to water services and the future costs off councils' balance sheets because it's strangling them. And in order to do that, councils have to relinquish direct control. But we want local communities to be able to put forward their priorities for the entities to meet. So every mayor of every council within the entity will be on that regional representative group, and whatever that number adds up to will be matched equally with local Māori.
Okay, so let's look at an example. So the Northland-Auckland Group A, even though Auckland is decidedly bigger than the other areas, does everyone just get one representative on the regional representative group?
In that example, we recognise that there's a disproportionate allocation of population, so we're proposing that Auckland have 3 representatives and each of the Northland councils have 1 each, so it's 3 each between Northland and Auckland.
All other examples, each council just gets one person on that group.
Well, we've indicated that we're comfortable having conversations with the likes of Hamilton and Christchurch, possibly others, but we don't want it to be a case where the smaller rural councils don't get the opportunity to put forward their priorities as well.
And you mentioned this, but just to be very clear, the number of council representatives will be equally matched by iwi Māori representatives, correct?
That's right, but the specific number is up to each region. So, for example, if you take the top of the south, there's 3 councils, but there's 8 iwi. Now, the 3 councils might decide to have 3 reps from each council so that each iwi can have a rep as well. That's absolutely fine. But as long as the minimum is that each council has 1 rep, and the total local government reps are matched by mana whenua, then we're happy.
Okay, and these regional representative groups appoint the professional boards that will run the entities?
That's right. So the regional representative groups are not a governance level body, but they appoint the governing bodies of the groups, competency-based engineers and water experts.
And
people
that's
that should be making investment decisions on water.
And that's
services.
why you say it's not co-governance.
Yeah, I do. I think that was misdefined from the start, and it's led a lot of the concern that we've seen around this debate. Essentially, what we're proposing is more or less what's usual practice within the local government sector as a whole. I admit that in some local council areas it's not 50-50, but in some it is. And that's absolutely how we should be going about this. I'm totally comfortable with what's being proposed because it's not a governing. And in fact, we've received advice from credit rating agencies that by having mana whenua on that board, it assists us to achieve balance sheet separation, which is the only thing that allows us to make these reforms affordable.
Okay, you said you had a conference call with councils today, right? So how many of the 67 are on board?
Oh, look, I wouldn't be able to give you an exact number because I haven't heard from every mayor since, but I have been monitoring the media just to gauge things. But
more than 50% though, Minister?
I'd say so. Yeah, I reckon we'll get a majority. We didn't have a majority with 4. But even if you look at the likes of Communities for Local Democracy, I've been speaking to mayors whose councils have signed up to that group, who have expressed to me personally their support for these proposals. So I think what this demonstrates is that local councils wanted reassurance that their needs would be met. They recognise reform is required, and I'm hoping that what we've proposed today will give them that reassurance.
If you don't get 50% or more support from the councils, do you have a real mandate to do this?
Well, I'm confident we will. If we don't, then we'll cross that bridge when we have to, but I'm confident we will. And the reason why is because every single council I've spoken to says they can't do this by themselves. They recognise there's a problem. We've got councils in this country that are at their debt cap, and we've got other councils that aren't at their debt cap, but their community can't afford to pay higher rates. If we get the debt associated to water investment off their books, it's going to make life a hell of a lot easier for those councils longer term.
Minister, there's a lot of bad blood over the previous incarnation of this policy. How are you going to get buy-in with this fresh version?
Well, I've got a good working relationship with the local government sector. It's a sector that I'm personally passionate about. I worked in local government before I was elected, and I'd like to think that the way I've gone about it as Associate Minister and Minister, people see that I'm upfront. We might not agree, but I'm respectful. I listen to what they have to say, and I try and incorporate their views as much as I can. There is trade-offs, and it's not easy, but I think that on the whole, this is the way forward in this matter. We can't simply say that we have to maintain direct local control because the numbers don't add up, and we're going to be leaving small rural councils and some cities out in the cold. We're not going to leave ratepayers with unaffordable bills. I just refuse to do that.
Minister, before you go, I was interested that you said you'd visited, 55 rural or provincial councils. Some of them had never seen a minister. Which ones, please?
There's a couple that said that to me, and I have to go back to my notes. There's one in Canterbury and there was one in Otago, but I want to check my notes before I give you them. But I know for a fact that no minister had gone and done what I did. I thought it was a good thing to do because I was coming into this process about 4/5 of the way through. I wanted to introduce myself, and I wanted to come back to Parliament and say that I've got a finger on the pulse of the local government sector, and I reckon I was able to do that.
Appreciate your time. That is Minister Kieran McAnulty, Local Government Minister. They relaunched the government's Three Waters policy today. It's called Affordable Water Reforms. Let us know your thoughts on that one, 2101 on text. It is 29 minutes to 6. Do stay with us. Kia mau tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It's time for the business news. Ko taku hoa e nai ko Nona Peltier. Nona joins me in the studio to talk all things business. Downturn in the residential housing market is hitting the construction industry. Yeah, what can you tell us about that?
Well, it was bound to trickle through eventually, wasn't it? Okay, so we got a couple of bits of information today. One is this thing called the Cordell Construction Cost Index. Now, that measures the movement in the cost of building a 3-bedroom, single-story house in brick and tile. All right, so that's what the baseline is, and that has shown that there was only a 0.6% increase in the quarter ended, well, I guess it's March, wherever, yes. Anyways, it's the lowest quarterly increase in more than 2 years. However, the prices don't necessarily mean that they're going to go down, because inflation is still inflation, whether it's 0.6% or something else. That's still an increase. But over the year earlier, it's down 8.5%. So that does show a trend. The industry doesn't think there's going to be a crash, though, because there's still a demand, even though the prices seem to have gone to a point where they're plateauing. There's more products available. So you know how we had shortages of plasterboard? That's eased, and so forth. So all of that has helped, but the labor costs are still on the rise. And that's going to be a concern to the Reserve Bank, because labor costs are inflationary.
Financial Services Council says household budgets are also under pressure. Wow. Surprised? Not.
Not really. So the Financial Services Council does an annual survey. This time around, they found just about 39% of the people they surveyed. That was about, more than 2,000 people, would find it very difficult to put their hands on about $5,000 that they might need in an emergency without going into debt. So $5,000 that they would need quickly, say within a week. They'd have to go into debt to get it. They're saying that's not a safety net for a family, and you need to start saving your money, because we haven't seen the worst of this economic downturn. So the Financial Services Council is asking people to put some money aside for that rainy day, which might come over the next year or so. Save your money.
Do they think that $5,000 is the sort of a sweet spot in terms of a buffer?
I think it's just I guess it depends on the size of your family, but it's an indicator. Mm-hmm. And that's all it is, really. And that's saying that there is going to be some difficulties for some people if they find themselves in an emergency situation. And we certainly have seen a number of people in that place over the last couple of months with so much natural disaster and so on. You need to have some cash in case of an emergency. If you can't put your hands on it and you got to go into debt, that's not a good position. So what they're really asking people to do is to think it through, save your money. And, that's part of it, obviously, that, it's a difficult time. And inflation is still there. Costs are up. There's lots of risks out there. Market volatility.
Okay, and
save your money.
In that wodge of papers, what news do you bring of the market?
It's not much of a wodge. Come on. Okay, well, the top 50 index, it ended up 14 points to 11,931, which is pretty good, because in Asia, the market has slipped somewhat. There's, again, renewed concern over a number of things. The U.S. dollar was under pressure, though, because inflation came in a little bit softer than the market was particularly, I guess, expecting, and that maybe this means the U.S. Federal Reserve will ease back on interest rates, but the market's often wrong, so let's not put too much story into that. What are we at? Yes, the New Zealand dollar, it was steady at 62.1 US cents. So that's not a resounding bounce or anything from yesterday. And a little bit weaker against the Australian dollar at 92.6 cents and 49.8 British pence.
Thank you, Nona. Ka kite, Nona Peltier there with Business News. There's been a surprise bonus for a Waikato town following the closure of a key highway into the Coromandel Peninsula. State Highway 25A has been closed since wild weather in January, forcing most Coromandel-bound traffic to go through the Karangahaki Gorge, taking them through Pairoa. Our reporter Louise Tanuth and camera operator Marika Habazi went for a visit.
It's home to the iconic L&P bottle and the antique capital of New Zealand. After years of COVID's disruptions and an abysmal summer, Pairoa are firmly on the map of more road trippers thanks to the detour in place for those heading to the Coromandel. At Arkwright Antiques, business is up about 25%, with visitors stopping by on their road trips. Owner Vivian Leonard says while it's a shame businesses on the eastern side of the Coromandel are struggling, they're grateful for the silver lining.
It's very fortunate for Pairoa, really, because it just brings so many more people through. So it's fortunate for us, but very sad for Whirianga and Tairoa.
She's owned the business for the last 30 years and says it's great to see people enjoying what their town has to offer.
People love coming to Pairoa. It's a bit of nostalgia. It takes them back in time.
few streets away is the Refinery Cafe and Lodging.
Here we go.
Popular for its history as a gold refinery over 100 years ago, owner Nicola Petri says as soon as State Highway 25A closed, traffic through the town increased.
Yeah, you could feel it straight away pretty much. We need our first set of traffic lights. You kind of take what you can get, especially after COVID and everything. It kind of feels like, now it's our turn to have a break.
They've had to adapt to accommodate for the new demand in the afternoon.
And then there's that more kind of European tourist, I suppose, who likes to do things a little bit later in the day. And I think they kind of get here and they're like, everything's shut at 2 o'clock, So, yeah, we had to think about that a little bit, having a little bit more to offer. In Thames that we're living in.
Worker Ros Spratt knows all too well the influence the roads are having on businesses. She lives in Waikino and used to commute to Thames, where she worked at Thames Antiques for the last 7 years. But the road closures in January and February, along with another colleague, she lost her job.
The week that we lost our jobs, there was, from what I understand, 7 businesses in Thames that either retrenched on staff or closed down because of the road closures.
The town's museum is also filling up their visitor books. Volunteer Ken Barber says the boost has been their saving grace.
We were perhaps thinking of cutting down on the number of days we were opening, but we might soon be in a position where we won't have to do that. And we'll be open at least weekdays and probably Saturday morning too.
Ken says recently they've had Kiwis stopping by on their travels with connections to the historic town. The Coromandel detour has helped.
You get people calling in. They've have forebears who lived here, ran businesses here, who got married here, went to school here. And of course they're losing that touch now, and they want to find out and write it down and record it before, of course, people are gone who know anything about it.
While business is slumping for some, it's booming for others, with the wait for a fix to State Highway 25A still 9 to 12 months away.
It is 20 minutes to 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. If you were listening to that story on radio, do check out the video version filmed by Marika Habazi. It'll be on our website. Well, homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. A lot of you getting in touch about Three Waters. We'll get to some of that a little later. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's go to the headlines now. Ko ewe anō tēnei.
A passenger on the ferry that collided with a jet boat between Russell and Paihia this afternoon told Checkpoint she saw a massive launch coming full throttle. Robin said the jet boat hit the side of the ferry at the front, close to where the skipper was, and several people were thrown into the water. The skipper is now in Middlemore Hospital. Wellington's mayor says it would be great if her counterparts around the country could help speed up water infrastructure reform. Plans to establish 4 mega water entities have been abandoned in favour of 10 smaller ones, but their introduction has been pushed back 2 years to 2026. Tory Whānau says the capital, which has chronic water infrastructure issues, is going to find the wait difficult. President Joe Biden is continuing his visit to Ireland with a day of ceremonies, including a speech to a joint sitting of both houses of the Irish Parliament. A Sydney woman in her 80s has died from tetanus in the first recorded fatality in New South Wales since 1993. Older Australians are being urged to update their vaccinations after another 2 cases in the state this year. And the closure of State Highway 25A into the Coromandel Peninsula has benefited businesses in the Waikato town of Paeroa, which now has more traffic passing through thanks to diversions. Artright Antiques owner Vivian Leonard says she's definitely noticed more visitors, and that could last for a while, as a permanent fix is at least 9 months away. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic in the South Island, State Highway 1 at Kinmont Park in Otago. Southbound lanes are now blocked because of a crash near the Morris Road overbridge. Still in the south, there's surface flooding on State Highway 8 between Fairlie and Twizel. Take care travelling through there. In Te Ikaumaui, the North Island, at Ofata in Rotorua, a car crash on State Highway 30 near Robinson Ave is causing congestion. Emergency services are at the scene. Our next news and weather is at 6 o'clock.
Ngā mihi, Evie. Let's take a quick snapshot of your views on Three Waters. This one in from Nick, who's in Reefton. On water, a vitally needed and visionary reform has been stymied by parochialism and racism, and yes, by bad communication from government from the outset, reckons Nick. On the relaunch of the policy, which indeed has a new name, it's not called Three Waters anymore. This person says if it looks like a horse, neighs like a horse, smells like a horse, it's probably still a horse. 2101 on text or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. The government is putting money into science to tell it how many billions of dollars the country is going to have to spend to protect against the next weather event. Research, Science and Innovation Minister Dr Aisha Verrill was in cyclone-devastated Hawke's Bay today to announce the $10.8 million fund. Ruth Hill reports.
Lucky to be alive, but stuck in limbo. That's how Esk Valley resident and business owner Katrina Harris describes her life in the wake of Cyclone Gabriel. The family lost everything but their lives and the sodden clothes on their backs when a wave of water 2 metres high slammed into their home. 3 years of working 7 days a week to build their business, the dog kennel and daycare service, all swept away.
We go back now and we look at it, it's just total destruction. And then we think, how the hell did we survive this? But we did. And, there were others that weren't so fortunate.
The house has been red stickered, but was deemed too dangerous for council staff to actually get close enough to put a physical sticker on it. It's full of silt and has slid off its foundations, and it's slated to be bulldozed. Mrs Harris says they don't know whether they'll be allowed to rebuild or whether the land will be red zoned.
But the insurers have also told us if we did build there again, they wouldn't insure us for floods again. So we really don't know. Like a lot of other people, it's just a waiting game to see what they're going to do.
Visiting Esk Valley, the Minister Aisha Verrill says the research fund will help lay the groundwork for the recovery. She says good science can tell us what we're dealing with, where roads need to go and where it's safe to rebuild.
Decisions about where we rebuild or if people move are complex. What we can do in the science system is make sure people have the best information for making those decisions, and that's an important part of my role.
Of the $10.8 million fund, more than half has already been allocated to projects involving 9 research institutes. Just under $2 million has been ring-fenced to enable Māori communities to access science services to support decision-making. NIWA natural hazards and hydrodynamics scientist Graham Smart says scientists can provide the data, but then it's up to councils and government to decide what to do about it.
Unless you have a sort of dictatorial political system, you can't just bulldoze people out of the way, and it's a long process. And so in the shorter term we have to look at, first of all, giving good advice as to where the threats are. Secondly, how do we make the people safer?
Dr Smart says that's going to involve early warning systems and tough long-term decisions, including managed retreat. The state's natural disaster insurer, Tokotuaki EQC, has welcomed the extra research funding. Its Chief Resilience and Research Officer, Dr Joe Horrocks, warns, however, that houses are still being built on floodplains, close to cliff edges, at sea level or on highly liquefiable land.
Councils are faced with so many different competing priorities and pressure from some quarters, from developers, and indeed from other government priorities around housing supply, which, we know is needed in this country. But it's forcing councils often into allowing development in some less than awesome places.
Dr Horrocks says while the memory of the cyclone and floods are fresh, people will forget. She says that's why we need legislative change to ban building in high-risk areas.
Ruth Hill with that report. Cases of the skin infection scabies are on the rise across Canterbury and other parts of the country. Scabies is caused by a tiny burrowing mite that's been described as lice of the flesh. While Te Whatu Ora say it's not an epidemic, treating it isn't proving easy. Samantha G has more.
A parasitic skin infection that makes you itch. Usually solved with a cream, if you can get a hold of it. Otago University Students Association Welfare and Equity representative Kaya Kahurangi Jamieson says cases spiked last August and seem to be on the rise again.
Anecdotally, there seems to be quite a prominence of scabies in the student community, and that's coupled with
the lack of availability of scabies cream, and I've also heard it's quite difficult to get ivermectin at the moment, so it's really just in full force down here.
Ivermectin, which gained notoriety during the COVID-19 pandemic, requires a prescription, and the subsidised treatment is only available if you can prove a topical treatment hasn't worked.
And one of the difficulties with that is it involves students having repeat appointments with the doctor to come in and say, hey, I think I've got scabies. The doctor will prescribe the cream, and then once they've got a hold of the cream and done multiple treatments, if that hasn't worked, they're going to have to go back and do another appointment, and that's a big financial barrier for a lot of students.
That's if they can find the topical treatments in the first place.
I've heard from someone who was asking around trying to see if anyone happens to have any spare scabies cream at their flat because they'd just been to a number of chemists and couldn't find it anywhere, which is quite concerning.
As scabies is not a notifiable disease, exact case numbers are unknown. Canterbury Infection Management Service Clinical Director Dr Sarah Metcalf says there has been an increase in presentations and referrals for scabies management to GPs and private dermatologists. In Christchurch, GP Dr Angus Chambers says he typically sees 1 or 2 cases a month, maybe less, but he has seen several in the last week.
We run both a GP and urgent care business, so people drop into us if they can't get into their GPs, and we're quite close to the university, and it seems as if there's outbreaks involving the student population as well.
Dr Chambers says people with the infection suffer from an itchy rash, and all close contacts of an infected person need to be treated.
Well, the usual treatment is a type of insecticide cream, but one of the problems is that that's become an extremely short supply at the moment, so it's quite hard to get hold of. So, look, I've had people come in and they've rung a number of pharmacies, can't find it, and so they're stuck in terms of getting the usual treatment.
A Google search confirms the subsidised topical permethrin treatment is sold out on most New Zealand websites.
It can drive people a bit round the bend, the itch of scabies. It's a very itchy rash. And then, of course, you can get what we call secondary infections, so sometimes bacteria start growing in it, and that can have some dangers.
Pharmac says stock of permethrin lotion is critically low, and additional stock is being air freighted into the country within the next 1 to 2 weeks.
It is 10 minutes to 6. Kia amo tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Some more of your thoughts on the Three Waters relaunch. What's it called now? Affordable Water Reform. Catchy title. This person says the stupid opposition to Three Waters reforms is an example of local councils' inability to embrace a wider vision when needed. Be parochial when it matters, but have the courage to see the wider good when it is needed, says Sue. Just don't understand the reasoning of the local government spokesperson who claims that the modified Three Waters plan is taking away an asset without paying for it. The end result will be that the communities will have a good or better freshwater, sewage and drinking water than they have now, and it will be maintained and paid for by the new entity. Just what is being taken away from local councils other than operational and fiscal responsibility? Emperor's new clothes, says Sean. Three Waters a complete shambles, bowing to the selfish demands of local councils who put control ahead of community. Labor should have stuck to its guns. On the Minister for Local Government, Kieran McAnulty, this person says, what an awesomely eloquent, balanced, sensible person, one to watch for PM, reckons Jude. And another listener's got in touch to say, like the cut of that McAnulty fella, more of him, please. Thank you for your feedback, 2101 on text, or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Leading Auckland tourism businesses have thrown their weight behind a campaign aimed at attracting more Australians here. Visitor numbers have plummeted since COVID, with half as many Aussies flying in last December compared to pre-COVID arrivals. The multimedia campaign will run until mid-June, encouraging Aussies to pop over for the weekend, the week or longer. EcoZip Adventures on Waiheke Island features in the campaign, and its founder Gavin Oliver joins us now. Kia ora, Gavin. How important are Aussies to your business?
Kia ora, yeah, good evening. Stunningly important, actually. Prior to the borders closing, we welcomed about 1.5 million Australians a year to the country. They made up something like 40% of our visitors. And for my business out on Waiheke Island, go back to that December 2019, they were about 38% of our total. So a 50% decrease is a substantial decrease.
Why aren't they flocking here? What's our problem?
I think there's a number of issues. I think visibility is one of those big things. We're in an extremely competitive marketplace now for international visitors. And the challenge we face, of course, is that whilst we've got increased airfares trans-Tasman, you've got destinations like Bali, Thailand and the USA. They're actively competing for the same kind of visitors that we want. And that's why campaigns like this are so important, because we need to be in market, we need to be visible, and we need to be talking to those Australians.
So do Aussies like Bali and America more than they like us?
No, I don't think it's that they like Bali in America more than us. It's just that there's a lot of things on offer to them. And if you're not visible, sadly, it's one of those things, if you're not in the forefront of their mind and somebody else is, Bali might just appear more appealing.
Airfares is a key factor in the sense that, you used to be able to go online and maybe at the last minute decide to book an airfare which would cost you several $100s, and now in some cases you're cracking $1,000. How much do you think that is an issue?
I think it's undoubtedly a major issue. Australians traditionally have treated New Zealand a bit like a domestic destination. It hasn't been a long planning and buying cycle. It's been pretty quick, and they've been able to do that because airfares have been comparable with domestic airfares within Australia. So one of the things we need to see, obviously, is more capacity trans-Tasman, and that's going to help.
Are we going to get it? Have you had conversations with Air New Zealand?
Look, not just Air New Zealand. Look, there are moves afoot to increase the amount of capacity trans-Tasman, but I've got to be really honest, that's way above my pay grade. Right now, I worry about enough ferry capacity to Waiheke Island.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you should mention that, Gavin, because I'm wondering, we're saying, come on over, visit us. Is New Zealand Inc. ready for an influx? Every day we hear about staff shortages, cafes that can't open regular hours, hospo hotels that don't have people to clean rooms, and you said it, the ferries. And you need those for people to get to Waiheke.
Yeah, we do. And look, and I know there are some challenges up and down the country, but if you look at the some of the stats that are beginning to appear from visitors that have been here, and I look at my own business, I mean, I was somewhat concerned going into summer this year because we had a very new team, because obviously because of COVID, we kept staff numbers down, we increased significantly. My customer satisfaction figures have never been higher. So the people in the tourism and hospitality workforces and those allied industries, they're doing the job. Yes, we could do with more. And I think we need to get over the canard that tourism and hospitality are low-paid industries, because that's fundamentally not true anymore. But yeah, we could do with more.
What's the sales pitch to get them here?
I think the key thing is we are only, for most of these people, a 2.5 or 3 hour journey away, and it's a land of variety, I guess. North of Auckland, you've got Matakana with the lovely markets on a Saturday and its share of vineyards. The city is vibrant, a great selection of restaurants. So it's the same but different. And I think it's the pitch here is just swing over. It's not far. Do something a little different.
And you can scare the hell out of yourself, Gavin, by flying off a platform on a thin wire over the treetops.
Yeah, we're not about scaring. We're not about scaring.
Adrenaline rush, then. Let me rephrase.
Yeah, so we've always said we're about getting your heart racing, but not scaring the pants off anyone. You should come over and do it.
Hey, really appreciate your time, Gavin. Good to talk to you. That's Gavin Oliver, EcoZip Adventures founder. He's on Waiheke Island, and that's about the campaign to get more Aussies over the ditch. Joe Biden has hailed Northern Ireland's young people in his speech at the new Ulster University campus in Belfast. The US President is on a 4-day visit, also travelling to the Republic of Ireland. Mr Biden has always been very proud of his Irish heritage and will be meeting relatives on his trip, the BBC's Chris Page reports.
Northern Ireland is more familiar with US presidential visits than many parts of the world. This was the 7th such occasion in less than 30 years. As always, the arrival of the president generated cheers, protests and a huge security operation. After holding talks with Rishi Sunak, Joe Biden travelled for a mile through Belfast city centre in his motorcade. His only public engagement was at Ulster University's new campus. He spoke about how Belfast felt so different to the place he visited in 1991.
The dividends of peace are all around us, and this very campus is situated in an intersection where conflict and bloodshed once held a terrible sway. Where barbed wire once sliced up the city, today we find a cathedral of learning built of glass. it just has a profound impact for someone who's come back to see it.
Mr. Biden acknowledged the peace wasn't perfect. The president said the politicians who'd signed the Good Friday Agreement 25 years ago had taken risks to largely end the conflict. He called for politicians today to show more courage to enable the devolved government to return. But his tone indicated he was aware of the need for delicate diplomacy amidst political sensitivities.
As a friend, I hope it's not too presumptuous of me to say that I believe democratic institutions established through the Good Friday Agreement remain critical to the future of Northern Ireland. So I hope the Assembly and the Executive will soon be restored. That's a judgment for you to make, not me, but I hope it happens.
To the UK, and Prince Harry will attend King Charles's coronation next month, but his wife won't be there. The couple have announced Meghan will stay at home in California with their children. The decision for the Duchess of Sussex to decline the invitation will be seen as part of unresolved family tensions made public in Harry's recent book and the couple's Netflix documentary. More from the BBC's Johnny Diamond.
The invitation to the Sussexes went out months ago. Their response came just over 3 weeks before the coronation itself. The palace and the Sussexes issued identical statements. Neither invitation nor acceptance should be read as an indication that the simmering anger between Harry and the rest of the royal family has abated, but instead that this event is beyond family quarrel. There's no indication yet from the palace as to what part Prince Harry will play on the day, but it's likely to be limited to attending the service at Westminster Abbey. He's no friend of high ceremony, and the balcony of Buckingham Palace is likely to be for working royals only. The Duchess and the couple's children, Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet, will remain in California. Neither the palace nor the Sussexes communications team offered an explanation, but a source close to the Sussexes drew attention to the date of the coronation, the same day as Prince Archie's birthday. It appears the Duchess has chosen to celebrate that over her father-in-law's coronation.
Well, we've turned the tap on the feedback around Three Waters. This person says it's an excellent adjustment of the original scheme. New Zealand needs it badly. Someone else says something has to be done about waters and no one else has come up with a plan. Co-governance is essential. That from Brian. Thanks, Brian. I think it's a good policy and the Minister has done a great job. I think it's fair to say there's a bit of praise for the Minister here. Another says generations of local government incompetence. Reform needs to happen. That's Dean from Waipukaro. Another says it's very comprehensive and the only system to correct the dire state of our water that has been neglected by councillors.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening. Ngā mihi o te pō, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. A woman has described the frightening moment a motorboat slammed into the ferry she was on in the Bay of Islands today. The ferry's skipper, Bill Elliott, was airlifted to Middlemore Hospital in a critical condition after the collision between Paihia and Russell. Robin, who was on board with her husband and 2 grandchildren, says the boat hit the ferry at speed. She told Checkpoint they immediately scrambled for life jackets.
So we found some of those little round life raft thingies that you have. There were several of those. People went up to look for the skipper. He was not in a good way at all, badly injured, and I think he was unconscious at that time. So my husband went up and tried to turn the motor off.
The police are seeking witnesses to the crash. The Grey District Mayor says her council's concerns about water reform haven't been alleviated by the government's overhaul of the Three Waters scheme. Plans to establish 4 mega entities to manage drinking water, wastewater and stormwater have been dropped in favour of 10 entities owned by local councils and run by a board. Tanya Gibson says that structure is a pretence.
There's still not a lot of influence in that, and the sham of the shareholding with no ownership, actual rights. They're still saying that, local councils and its people own, these entities, but the shareholdings still have no shareholders' rights in them.
Tanya Gibson says her district's water assets are in good condition, but the plan's 2-year delay to 2026, coupled with political uncertainty, is disruptive. The Mayor of Auckland has set a deadline for the council to implement recommendations made in the independent review of its response to flooding in January. Wayne Brown says that within the next 6 months, he'll hold an unscheduled drill to test the council's emergency preparedness. The review, released yesterday, found the Auckland Civil Defence's emergency group plan to be outdated and unfit for purpose. Mr Brown says the issues are systemic and it's the responsibility of senior management to address them. Council staff have until October the 13th at the very latest to prepare for the drill. The chair of ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, says the bloc strongly condemns a military airstrike this week on a village in Myanmar, which is reported to have killed up to 100 people, including civilians. Today's attack in the Sagaing area was the deadliest in a recent string of air attacks. ASEAN agreed a peace plan with Myanmar's junta in 2021, but members have been increasingly frustrated by the military's failure to halt offensives and open dialogue with the country's resistance movement. A fatal case of tetanus has been recorded in New South Wales for the first time since 1993. A woman in her 80s died from the bacterial infection earlier this month. 2 other cases have been recorded in the state this year. All 3 cases stem from contaminated garden soil entering people's legs via a minor wound. Scientists who have completed an unprecedented study of cancer say they don't think a cure will be found anytime soon. They say they're surprised at the almost infinite ability of tumours to evolve and survive. More on this from the BBC's James Gallagher.
Cancers evolve and change over time. They're also made up of millions of cells that have each mutated in slightly different ways. Researchers have tracked that constantly shifting picture in more than 400 patients for 9 years. It's the most in-depth analysis of how tumours evolve to evade the immune system, become more aggressive and spread around the body. Not every cancer can be prevented though, but the researchers hope their findings will also lead to new ideas for spotting cancers earlier.
Russia now says it wants to keep using the International Space Station until 2028. The announcement marks a reversal of its previous policy, made after relations deteriorated with the West following the invasion of Ukraine. At that point, Russia had said it would abandon the station next year. The Research, Science and Innovation Minister says the recovery in cyclone and flood-hit regions will be based on science. Aisha Verrill, who was in Hawke's Bay today, has announced a $10.8 million fund to support urgent research such as mapping land changes and assessing stop banks.
I've seen New Zealand's best scientists here on the ground today, and they are building strong relationships with regional councils to make sure that their cutting-edge information is available for the people who need it.
Aisha Verrill says more than half the fund has already been allocated to 9 research agencies. Just under $2 million is ring-fenced to enable Māori communities to access science services. And the closure of a key highway into the Coromandel Peninsula has benefited businesses in a Waikato town, which now has more traffic passing through it. State Highway 25A was washed away in wild weather in January, so most traffic heading to the peninsula has to go the long way through the Karangahake Gorge. Pairoa is a popular place to stop on the new route, and Vivian Leonard, who owns Artright Antiques, says she's definitely noticed more people passing through.
It's very fortunate for Pyro, really, because it just brings so many more people through. So it's fortunate for us, but very sad for Whirianga and Taira.
Waka Kotahi says a permanent fix to State Highway 25A is 9 to 12 months away. That's the news.
Tomorrow on Afternoons with me, Charlotte Ryan, in for Jessie Mulligan. Susie Cato gives us some good inspiration on what to do with our children over these school holidays. We find out the latest films to watch. We talk Italian food inspired from our gardens. And we discover what is nicknamed the Dentures of the Sea in Critter of the Week. That's tomorrow on Afternoons with me, Charlotte Ryan, here on RNZ National.
Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. You're back with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. From Northland to Waikato, including Coromandel, scattered showers, possibly heavy with a risk of thunderstorms and hail north of Hamilton from the afternoon, easing overnight in Northland and clearing throughout tomorrow afternoon. From Waipomo to Whanganui, including Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country, mainly fine. Scattered afternoon and evening showers, possibly heavy today. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. Showers becoming widespread this afternoon with thunderstorms possible about the ranges, easing to drizzle this evening. Manawatu to Wellington, fine spells increasing. A few showers for Wellington around midday tomorrow. Marlborough, Canterbury, North Otago and Dunedin, periods of rain or drizzle. Nelson, Bulla, Westland, Fiordland, also Central Otago, Southland and Clutha. Isolated showers but rain with heavy falls for Bulla and Northern Westland until evening, becoming fine everywhere early tomorrow, and Chatham Islands showers easing then clearing tomorrow morning. The time is 7 minutes past 6. I'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Kia ora rā e ho. No mai hoki mai, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The government's scrubbed up and relaunched its highly controversial Three Waters policy, complete with a new name, Affordable Water Reforms. It's ditched plans for 4 mega water entities in favour of 10. Like the original plan, the 10 entities based around existing regional boundaries will be owned by local councils and each run by a professional board. The boards get strategic oversight from groups made up of local council and mana whenua representatives. Water reform could cost up to $185 billion over the next 3 decades, but the government says its plan will make that more affordable. With us now are 3 mayors from Porirua, Anita Baker. Vince Kokorillo joins us from Whangarei, and Waimakariri Mayor Dan Gordon. Good evening to you all.
Good evening.
Good evening, Lisa.
Let's start with a bit of a whip around. Anita, do you like this or not?
Yes, absolutely.
And why?
Because it gives us certainty going forward. We're in a group that's probably similar to we've already got. We're only adding 3 new councils, and it gives us more borrowings. Takes it off our books and we get the money going forward.
Vince, Anita reckons it's a good thing. What do you say?
I'm at the reverse end from our end. Whangarei is a council which has actually looked after itself, done very, very well, and actually managed to get its assets to a good point and actually looking after our community very, very well. So this actually disadvantaged us immensely.
How so?
Well, basically it takes the assets off our books, so it basically causes us to have more debt as a council, so it actually means our rates will actually end up increasing. So while we're trying to keep our rates at an affordable level for our ratepayers, we've managed to upgrade our sewage systems, upgrade our stormwater systems, upgrade our water systems, and yet now we're going to have that all taken off us and given to another entity which doesn't really care about Northland.
There's a lot to dig into there and we'll come back to it, but let's hear what Dan reckons. Dan, is this more palatable?
No, it's not. There have only been minor tweaks to the models, and these don't answer the real concerns about community property rights and having a meaningful voice. My view is very similar to expressed by Mayor Vince. We are another of those communities that have worked very hard, spending over $100 million on our Three Water assets over the last 20 years to make sure they're up to speed. All we'll end up doing is subsidising other communities. My community will not agree with this and do not agree with this. So simply adding more entities and changing the name is a desperate attempt to save the plan. I just don't think it cuts the mustard, and New Zealanders will see through this. It's the same plan with a different name.
Anita, how do you feel about the suggestion that your assets are being pinched?
I don't have a problem with my assets being pinched and going to a new entity. They're leaking like a sieve, as are most of them in the region, except Kapiti for us. So I have no problem with that. Better off council books.
And the thing is, you still have control, don't you, Vince? So they're not actually taking your assets. Council is still owning them.
No, from what I've seen, the council will not own them. They are a member of it. If the council owned them, then they'd still be on the council books. Now, they're not on the council books at all, so council actually has very little say on it, and the membership of that still leaves us into question as well.
The government says you will still own those entities. They'll be owned by local councils.
How do you own something when it's not on your books?
So what, you think you should be paid for them?
Absolutely.
Dan, do you think you should be paid for them?
Well, that's the basis on which we took a legal case ourselves in Whangarei and Timaru to the High Court, who agreed with us. that the government was expropriating our assets without providing compensation. And that's what the government should be doing. If that's its true intention, it should be doing that. We're ending up in a situation we will lose effective control and influence of our assets. We don't end up owning them. It goes into an entity model where we get a voice there that sets a statement. That's the only influence that I can see we get. And by the way, we're starting to understand the detail. I've now heard that the only sweetener and carrot that was on the table to councils when the government chose to mandate it was $1.5 billion of better off funding. That's now been removed. The Minister didn't say that this morning when we had a briefing with him and talk about that at all. That'll be of great concerns to councils, especially as the government mandated this through, that funding, which would have gone some way to compensate, is no longer there.
Dan, you say that you're losing control of the asset, but here is the thing that the government says. You will have a regional representative group, which council members will be on, and all the councils in your particular regional group will have representation. Mayors at the table is how the Minister describes it. You, as a group, will appoint the professional board directors who will be in charge of the day-to-day operations of your entity. That's lots of control, isn't it, Dan?
No, it's not. Not when we have the effective control and influence right now. We have one say around the table. We'll have no opportunity of influencing when we need to about how we think our assets should be and how our investment should happen in our particular districts. Just bear in mind that we go through civil defence emergencies all the time, unfortunately. And these are very real issues when it comes to us knowing that we can influence and make sure that our assets are well looked after and we can get our staff to respond. We'll have no ability to do that under the new structure, and that's been our concern and the crux of the issue for us the whole way through.
Anita, how much influence and control do you think you will have with the structure suggested?
I think I'll have the same as I already have on my existing Wellington Water Committee. I've still got a seat at the table, and I don't think the carrot's been taken away. That was just trying to get councils like Dan's on board. If anything, it reduces the debt that entities have to borrow. So from my point of view, yes, we have a layer above that, but whereas Mayor and iwi below it are saying what we want. So I don't have an issue with what's happened.
And you're happy with the 50% split between council representation and mana whenua on that regional representative group?
Yes, I am, because we actually have, I think from the 8 councils, I think we have 7 or 8 iwi. So we already have iwi, all of us, at the table anyway. So for us, there's no difference.
Vince, you're in the region with Auckland. They're going to get 3 spots on that regional group. Have you been told what you're getting? Is it 1?
No, we've been told nothing at the present moment, but I may just go back to the iwi side of things. We need to make it very, very clear. Northland, we work on the hapu basis. We do not work on iwi basis. So our hapus do not get looked after in the situation. So once again, we've got a system which is top down rather than bottom up.
Let's talk about whether this is better for your ratepayers, because that is how the government is selling it. Your ratepayers are going to have to pay less in water expenses comparative to what they would if you didn't do this. Dan, do you buy that?
No, I don't. And in fact, the numbers...
Why not? There's a flow chart with numbers and everything.
Well, we've consistently challenged the government's flow chart and asked for clarity on their numbers, which do not stack up. In my case, my council, they're saying we're $1 billion short over the next 30 years. We've demonstrated, actually, we've got $100 million of expenditure that we would need to spend, which we'd already budgeted for. Where's the other $700 million go? That goes into subsidising other communities. So will my council be better off? No, it won't be. Look, I appreciate with the case of Mayor Anita and in Wellington that there's a special case there and in terms of where they're at. But don't judge us all. One size doesn't fit all. If Wellington needs a model for Wellington, Wellington should have that. But the rest of us are actually quite capable of managing our own. And in fact, we're having those conversations across council boundaries anyway about shared services and other arrangements, regional models we were considering, and how we might work together. They were genuinely happening anyway before the government came in and mandated this.
OK, we're almost out of time, so I'm going to go round all three of you now. And the Minister, Kieran McAnulty, is confident that he can get support from more than 50% of the councils. Anita, do you share that confidence?
Yes, I do now. I do. Here's our council.
Vince?
No, I don't.
And what about you, Dan? Is the Minister going to get more than 50% support from councillors?
From what I'm hearing, no, he won't. But look, can I just say the Minister, I think within the confines he had, has made a genuine attempt, but he had a very narrow focus in this. But I think he's tried a genuine attempt. But look, there was a better way, and we'd shown him that where we could have sat down and found consensus. Our door was always open to the government on this. And I work with 30 other councils in this space, and we'd have been very open to have talked about a better way that have found consensus. So our door always remains open to the Minister with that, but in this case, he had a very limited focus, and that's what he's been able to deliver today.
Thank you all for joining us. That is three mayors on the newly relaunched Three Waters policy, goes by another name. Porirua Mayor Anita Baker, Vince Cockerillo from Whangarei, and Waimakariri Mayor Dan Gordon. Thank you to you all. It is almost 18 minutes after 6, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. A ferry skipper is in a critical condition following a collision between two boats in the Bay of Islands. Grandmother Robin was travelling with her husband and two young grandsons on the Happy Ferry Company sailing from Russell to Paihia just before midday. Earlier in the program, she described to me the sheer horror as passengers watched a jet boat coming towards them at what appeared to be full speed before it slammed into the port side of her ferry.
I'd say it could have been a minute. I mean, the little kids beside us were joking, saying, look, that boat's going so fast, it's going to hit us. And everyone was looking at it for quite a while.
And so how did the people who were thrown into the water or who jumped, what happened to them?
So the guy that hit us, I don't know if he turned his boat around and was going away. I don't know if he was doing something like that on purpose or not. But we were just yelling at him to please go and get the people in the water. And he didn't seem like he was going to do that without us asking him to do it.
Meanwhile, Rosie Morrow was a passenger on the Happy Ferry travelling in the opposite direction from Paihia to Russell for lunch. Her vessel was first on the scene after the accident and helped rescue Robin's family and the other passengers. She sent us footage showing extensive damage to the port side of that ferry.
From my understanding, quite a fast jet boat, like 600 horsepower with two big engines on the back, has basically slammed straight into the side of one of the Paihia Russell ferries, and we came across it just after it had happened. And there was a massive hole in the side of the hull, and a lot of freaked out passengers, and yeah, it's quite dramatic.
So what has happened to the passengers on the damaged ferry, and did it appear that anyone was injured?
So we took on most of the passengers onto our ferry. There was one very injured person who a parasail jet boat offered, that was in the area as well, offered to just jet boat them back to Paihia where there was an ambulance waiting. So when we took the passengers back to Paihia, that person was being loaded onto a stretcher and taken away by an ambulance.
And you say the ferry was severely damaged. Can you give us a bit more of a description of what that looked like?
Basically, totally bashed out down one side. I don't think it hasn't sunk. They managed to anchor it and get all the passengers off, but I think it will probably be a write-off. But basically, half of its hull down one side was completely caved in, and all the signs on the top were listing over. It wasn't very pretty.
Rosie, can you give us an idea of how many people were on that particular boat that you then got onto your ferry?
I think luckily there weren't actually that many. I would say maybe probably about 10. I know a number of them went off with the injured person, so I only saw the ones that actually came onto our ferry. There was quite a few small children who were very traumatised and crying, which I felt so sorry for them. But I think it wasn't super full, which was very lucky. And it was quite a big ferry too, so Yeah.
The vessel that you describe as a jet boat, how did that look after the incident?
That actually looked surprisingly quite okay. The front of it was a little bit dented. It had something broken on the front of it, and he actually accompanied our ferry back to Paihia and said that he was taking on quite a lot of water. I think a lot of the damage may have been underneath, which you couldn't see, because they must have been going very fast, because I think what happened was they hit it and then went up onto it, kind of onto the ferry a little bit. I'm not sure what happened. There was only a man and his daughter, as far as I'm aware, on board, but it had very powerful engines, so it could go quite fast, and I'm not sure what happened, why it happened.
And that was ferry passenger Rosie Morrow describing the rescue of Happy Ferry passengers following a collision on the water between Russell and Paihia earlier today. And both Maritime New Zealand and police are investigating the incident. The damaged boat has now sunk. Police are asking anyone who may have witnessed an 8-metre private vessel driving erratically to contact Crime Stoppers on 0800 555 111. Now I'm going to repeat that. If you saw an 8-metre private vessel driving erratically in that area, please contact Crime Stoppers. They would like to speak to you. 0800 555 111. A change in direction now. You can probably all imagine this scenario. You're caught a bit short. Your mobile phone is almost drained of its juice. Tempted to plug into one of those public charging stations conveniently dotted around the shops, airports or hotels? Well, don't. That's the message from CERT NZ and the FBI that's recently tweeted out a warning to avoid them. The FBI says bad actors have found ways to use them to introduce malware and monitoring software onto devices. Jordan Hairspring, Manager of Threat and Incident Response Team at the cyber security agency CERT NZ, echoes the warning.
Our advice is essentially the same as what the FBI has put out the last couple of days. So do not plug your phones and laptops directly into those public USB charging ports. You should be bringing your own charging device, which you can plug into a wall socket and then use that to charge your devices.
So when we talk about public charging ports, which ones are you including? Can you just give us some examples that you shouldn't go near?
Yeah, well, go near physically is fine, but don't plug stuff into them. So we're thinking things like, in the airports, you'll see public charging stations. Some hotels will have them, even in the rooms. Some buses, if they're nice fancy buses, and even some planes will have them. So all of them are safest to avoid if you can.
So not even on an Air New Zealand flight down to Wellington, I shouldn't be plugging my phone in if there's a facility for it?
But the reality is that for most of them, they're probably fine. Like we don't see a lot of this attack, but they are really easy things to keep yourself safe from. So and our advice is it's best to avoid them.
So can you explain to me exactly why? What are the potential hazards?
Mm-hmm. So in these USB charging stations, there's little bits of software and hardware behind them that an attacker can potentially use to load either malicious software onto your device, or they can use that to extract data directly from your device. So both of those methods, they'll be able to extract personal or other sensitive or financial information from your device if they are exploiting that particular charging station.
And do they do that remotely, or does it require them to physically tamper with the charging port?
It depends on the kind of malicious software, to be honest. Some of it, they will need to actually tamper with it, and most of the types of attacks, they will need to tamper with the device initially. When it comes to actually extracting that information, most of the time they can do that remotely, but some of them they'll need to access it again later as well.
So I'm just trying to visualise this in my head. Plugging into those ports is like lowering the drawbridge and inviting the enemy in, is it?
It's kind of like building a road to the enemy camp. You still got your gates up, so there's still some security measures that they'll have to bypass, but giving them that access invites them to do that.
Jordan, do you ever plug into any of these things, these public charging ports?
I do not.
Okay. Do you know why the branch of the FBI has warned against this recently? Are you aware of any specific threats?
Look, I don't know of any specific threats, and to be honest, this is a fairly long-standing piece of advice from both the FBI and from ourselves. It's possible they've recently had a spate of attacks in their jurisdiction where they've seen a lot of this being exploited, so they've just reiterated that advice to keep their constituents safe.
When you say it's been a reasonably long-standing piece of advice from CERT NZ, how well publicised do you think it is? Because, I mean, you wander through the mall or on the buses here in Auckland, some of them have charging ports and people are using them. Yeah.
It's not a particularly well publicised piece of advice. And again, if I'm being completely honest, I thought this was fairly public knowledge, but talking to friends and family recently, I've discovered that there are a lot of people who aren't aware of this. So I'm quite glad that there's been some conversation going around it and raising that awareness for people.
Are you aware of any cases in New Zealand where people's devices have been compromised from plugging into these public ports?
We haven't had anything reported to us specifically that can be traced directly back to something like this. It's, as I said earlier, it's unlikely that this kind of thing is going to happen to you or, in New Zealand or, in a New Zealand lounge or on a flight. But it's really easy to keep yourself safe. So the best thing to do is to, bring your own charging devices and keep yourself protected.
How do you know if your phone's been compromised, if you have been plugging into these things?
That can be quite tricky to answer. There's a few things that are worth looking deeper into, like if your phone is operating quite slowly, noticeably more so than usual, or if you get different apps or windows popping up that you don't expect or haven't told the device to do, that's worth getting investigated.
Jordan, what else should we know? Because this is a revelation for some of us, me included. So what other tips have you got, please, before you go?
Similarly, in the line of USB devices, if you find a USB device, a little USB key, or get given one, especially if you don't completely trust that person, you shouldn't be plugging that into your own laptops or phones or other devices at home. And more generically, keep two-factor authentication on your accounts and have good password hygiene. And those three things, along with keeping your devices updated, so patching to the latest versions, will keep you protected from the majority of the attacks out there.
Wow, that was Jordan Hairspring there. I mean, who would have known? I didn't. You probably did, though, because, you're smarter than the average bear, our listeners. The Late News team's going to keep you updated throughout the night because that's about all we've got time for. Remember, if you missed anything from Checkpoint, you can find us again on Spotify or Apple or wherever you get your podcast from and have a re-listen. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi a pōpō tomorrow from 5 a.m. First up, we'll be speaking with supporters and opponents of Three Waters to find out what they make of the government's overhaul, plus the disco dancers clearing rubbish as they boogie. Wow, that is one to listen out for. Disco dancers, cool. I wonder what the music is. Kaua e wariwari te atatero e a mātou kōrero. Don't forget you can check out our stories and videos online. Thanks for all your feedback this evening. We really appreciate it. Have a wonderful night. Kia pai tōpō. And we will catch you tomorrow, same place, same time.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Good evening, I'm Evie Ashton. Police are seeking witnesses to today's Bay of Islands ferry crash, which left the skipper with critical injuries. The government's revised plans for managing drinking waste and stormwater haven't pleased all local mayors, but Prime Minister Chris Higgins says he expects a majority will accept the reforms, which will set up 10 management entities by 2026. A 74-year-old man extradited from Pakistan is due in a London court tomorrow, charged with the murder of British policewoman Sharon Bishanevsky in 2005. And the state natural disaster insurer Tokatū Ake, EQC, is calling for legislative change to ban building in high-risk areas. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
This Sunday morning, After decades of award-winning novels, plays and short stories, Barbara Ells tells us why she's now publishing her memoir. Renowned Scottish conductor Sir Donald Runnicles joins us ahead of his debut with the NZSO this month. And if you think men are too feminine, kids are spoiled and we need to get back to teaching the basics, political scientist Paul Ferry says we've seen it all before. From 8 o'clock Sunday morning with me, Susanna Leatawa, and for Jim Mora on RNZ National.
You're still with Evie Ashton. It's 29 minutes to 7, and that means it's time for Trending Now. First, the detail. On tonight's episode, scams are seemingly on the rise, and they're becoming increasingly elaborate. But who takes action against the scammers?
Kia ora, I'm Tom Kitchen, and today on The Detail, scams.
Every year, Kiwis are losing tens of millions of dollars to romance scams.
One of the latest swindles, people are paying thousands of crypto dollars for a pet that doesn't exist.
A Rangiora man has lost $320,000 on a Bitcoin scam.
This one came to Fairgo straight from the police. It is a scam that has already cost one person $1 million.
And some of them are targeting our vulnerable communities.
Thousands of Pasifika in Auckland who have fallen prey to illegal pyramid schemes have been left without cash for food or rent just as the country's plunged into lockdown.
As one Tongan mother of two had to learn the hard way, the perpetrators of a scam can also be people we know and trust.
When your own community is telling you this is the bee's knees, it becomes almost like brainwashing.
With these new age scams, is there enough power in our law to stop them?
From the outside looking in, it's a pretty confusing and frustrating situation.
Nicholas Poynton and Maria Slade are journalists with the National Business Review. They've been investigating scams and the regulatory gaps. Here's Nicholas.
I was looking into, I'll call it a get-rich-quick scheme called Validus.
Let's make Validus